This is Will Hopkins, and you're watching The Punk Patriot.
So I was recently asked by my friend Will Hopkins of Peace Action to do a video on sequestration. I wasn't sure what sequestration was or what he was talking about, let alone how it related to the anti-war movement. I do know about carbon sequestration, in which carbon dioxide is pumped into the ground. An idea so simplistic and nonsensical, I'm quite certain that the coal industry's research and development team is made up of kindergarteners.
We could make a robot that eats CO2 and poops out cookies.
We'll take that under consideration.
We could put giant ice cubes in the ocean.
I don't know, that sounds expensive.
We could stop using coal and start using wind and solar.
Come on, don't be stupid, kid.
We could pump it into an underground city of mermaids.
Pumping it underground. That's perfect! But what Will was talking about is actually something different. Remember that super committee thing? You know, the team of people who were supposed to eliminate an arbitrary number of dollars from the deficit while simultaneously raising taxes back up to what they were in the 1990s, completely off the table? There was an equally arbitrary provision that was part of the formation of that super committee, which stated that if this bipartisan committee of millionaires couldn't decide on what to cut from the budget cuts would happen across the board. We're talking about cuts to everything. Good things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Pell Grants, funding for the humanities, the arts, funding for schools, funding for trains, funding for roads and bridges, funding for libraries, veterans benefits, food stamps, housing assistance, NASA, and much, much more. But it also cut money for bad things like subsidies to already profitable oil companies, subsidies for already profitable coal companies, subsidies for nuclear power, which is extremely dangerous and will never be profitable, subsidies for the prison industrial complex, and cuts also to, and this is how it connects to the anti-war movement, the Pentagon. The Pentagon, which gives millions of dollars every year to corporations like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, GE, and the list goes on, for technology that the Pentagon doesn't want or need, like jet planes that haven't been used since the start of the Cold War. And also things that maybe civilians don't want or need, like domestic surveillance drones. What's interesting is that because the Pentagon makes up a very large chunk of our federal budget, it also makes up a large chunk of the cuts. What sucks is that we're also going to be underfunding all of the good stuff that the government does. I personally would love to see cuts for things that I disagree with, and see that money pay for things that actually benefit people. All that stuff that we supposedly don't have money for, because we spend all of that money blowing people up. But under sequestration, that doesn't happen. That's not an option. What happens is one giant cut across the board. So is sequestration a good thing or a bad thing? I actually don't know the answer to that question. I think that you'll have to decide for yourself. It really depends on your priorities as a citizen. It is, interestingly enough, very similar to an argument that Glenn Greenwald made over on Salon.com about whether or not one should support Ron Paul in the Republican primary, because of the fact that he is better on civil liberties issues than Obama, although he is disastrous on a host of other things, like infrastructure, education, pretty much anything that deals with government spending. Glenn Greenwald makes a case that, for some, civil liberties is such an important issue that they're willing to hold their nose through all the social Darwinist stuff that Ron Paul stands for. In fact, sequestration is a lot like a budget that Ron Paul would propose. Just cut everything arbitrarily. Now, an argument that a person arguing for sequestration might make could go something like this. The United States is a homicidal force. Corporations profit while suckling the teat of government and making tools of homicide. Cutting spending to the military would force an end to the American empire and would force the United States government to bring troops home, to close the thousands of military bases in 172 countries around the world, to stop funding death merchants like GE, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, etc. Things like Social Security and Medicare are already mandated by law, so no cuts legally can be made to large sections of the budget in regards to social spending, so really no worse for the wear. And if things get really bad economically, maybe people will start rioting in the streets and demanding real economic reform. Then they'll get the social spending that they have deserved for years anyways. And a counter-argument to this person might go something like this. Economic justice is incredibly important. 45,000 people die every year from preventable illness because they can't afford medical care. 16 million children in the United States go to bed hungry at least one night of the week because they are living in poverty. The real unemployment rate is at 22% or higher. Cuts across the board would mean massive job loss, which would throw our already fragile economy into a tailspin and make things much worse. And a counter-argument to that might go something like this. Economic justice is important, But we're never going to make meaningful reform until there's massive unrest. Things will not get better until they're a lot worse. The reason why we have so many great social programs is because things were so bad during the Great Depression when capitalism massively failed to work, enriching the 1% of society at the expense of everything and everyone. Part of the fight for economic justice is ending funding for our imperial expeditions and redirecting that funding to human needs rather than corporate greed. In his essay, $5 Chess Game, Best of Three, Zuccotti Park, David Hill writes about the situation we as Americans find ourselves in. The current position doesn't look good for me. I'm ahead in material, but all my pieces are committed to defending my king. I'm in zugzwang. Zugzwang is a term used in chess to refer to a position where every move you have is a bad one. Once you're in zugzwang, things like having more pieces than your opponent don't matter anymore. If you can't use them to attack, you may as well not have them at all. Often players who find themselves in zugzwang simply resign. A growing number of people in America know what it feels like to be in zugzwang. For some of them, their whole life has been one long zugzwang. They can't remember ever having any good options. Without catching a lucky break, a lifetime of hard work for most people results in just that. A lifetime of hard work. For others, they maybe once thought they had it all, a good job with a pension, a nice house with a payment they could afford, set for life. Then in an instant, it all disappeared. House is underwater, ARM is popping on the loan, pension fund bought a bunch of mortgage-backed securities, and all that's left is utter, hopeless zugzwang. In chess, you don't have to resign when you're in zugzwang. You can always make a sacrifice. A sacrifice in chess is when you intentionally give up some material to your opponent. And there are two kinds of sacrifice: a straight sacrifice and a sham sacrifice. A sham sacrifice is basically a kind of hustle. Your opponent gives up material for you, but it's a trap. If you get greedy and take the piece, you lose. People often make a lot of fuss over games that involve sham sacrifices, like Bobby Fischer's Game of the Century, but there's nothing dramatic about a sham sacrifice. Once you take the bait, all uncertainty about the game disappears. The other type of sacrifice, a straight sacrifice, is when you accept a disadvantage in order to break the current position. The only way out of zugzwang is to create a new position where you and your opponent have a different set of options, even if it means that you play from less strength. Strength, after all, is relative to the choices available to you. It is a risk, but when your other option is resignation, it hardly seems like one. So really the question that you have to ask yourself is this: do we fight to keep what little we have, even though what little we have isn't really working? Or do we offer up a straight sacrifice? Should we throw a major piece out into the line of fire, knowing that while it puts us at a temporary disadvantage, it also can fundamentally shift the game? I don't know the answer. That's up to you. Did you like this video? Please donate what you think it was worth in the link below. Please also be sure to click the like button. If you want to help me continue to produce videos like this one, please become a monthly sustainer over at punkpatriot.com. I make t-shirts.